Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Penny, Winter and Willow? Part 1. If you want more awesome fan fiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so without wasting any time, let's get into the video. We've made a remarkable discovery. Well, I suppose you could say the SDC made said discovery. It was their mine, after all, and their workers that uncovered this. But I digress. This is the scientific find of the century. A young man frozen in the ice. Not only that, but buried beside the bones of a great beast. All of Atlas is buzzing about this. Can you believe it? I certainly can't. I've been asked to have a look at him, and initial tests have proven promising. He's thousands of years old. Who could he be? What secrets might he hold? Why fascinating. Utterly fascinating. This discovery will change all of Remnant. For the better, I hope. It's already given me some ideas in regards to repairing Penny. In any case, glory to Atlas. That young man is our property. Schnee property. It was the Schnee Dust Company that found this young man and the bones of that beast. My resources that dug him up, and my family that should reap the rewards. Any discoveries made should benefit our family first, Atlas second, and the rest of the kingdoms third. In that order. What do I care if he's alive or dead? Dissect him, cut him up, and see what he's made of. If they won't, well. HRMMPH. Perhaps my daughters may be useful for something after all. The wealth of Atlas is my wealth, after all. Glory to Atlas. A medical marvel has fallen into our lap. This boy is, I don't even know how to describe him. Magic. I never believed in it. But seeing this. While he has yet to wake, his body, what remains of it, heals at a prodigious rate. Tissue samples have been taken. Tests were conducted. His blood alone heals others. Actually heals them. It actively restores cells and promotes cellular regeneration on a level we've never seen. The medical applications alone are staggering. He could be the cure for so many things. The bones of the beast he was found has proven another mystery. Are harder than any metal we can produce. They're virtually indestructible. Judging by the skull, we think it might have been a fox. How does such a creature grow so large? It's been weeks now. He still hasn't woken, but I'm determined to see him treated ethically if nothing else. Palendia has requested that we reactivate Project Steelheart. I've authorized it. With luck, these implants ought to reinforce his organs and help him recover before he wakes. If he wakes. He was badly wounded when we found him, and some parts of him simply cannot be recovered. Is it wrong that a small part of me pities him? He's been asleep for a terribly long time now. Whoever he was, whoever he has been, wherever he hails from, it's probably long gone. I suspect that when he does wake, he will be frightened. Confused. Possibly even angry with us. But we cannot let him die. Not when it is within our power to save him. We must. We can save him. We can rebuild him. We have the technology. What would you think of him, Ospen? I wish you were here, old friend. Sentiment aside, Atlas needs this young man. He could be the key to everything. Perhaps even destroying Salem once and for all. He's begun to show signs of life now. I've tasked the Aesops with watching him around the clock. Well, we have every reason to believe him harmless, forewarned is forearmed, as they say. For all we know, he may not speak our language. Regardless, we'll be taking him off the breathing tube tomorrow. From there we'll see if he's able to sustain himself. If not, the tube goes back in. I do hope he wakes up. He's attracted a lot of attention, and not all of it good. We cannot keep this under wraps forever. Sooner or later, the enemy will take note of him. May he wake before that day. Glory to Atlas. Please, wake up. Naruto didn't want to, after so many years spent in silent slumber. The pain that came with breathing, let alone opening his eyes, was almost too much to bear. Like 1,000 tiny needles stabbing at his retina, so too did he flinch away from them. Of course he did. Only a lunatic stared into a bright light without blinking. Please, wake up. An unfamiliar voice nudged at him anew. Open your eyes, if you are able. He squinted against it and groaned. His throat felt dry. Scratchy. As if he hadn't had any water in months. Impossible. He'd just been, where had he been, anyway? When he reached for it, the memory slipped through his fingers like a slippery eel, leaving him grasping at nothing. You have to get up. The voice prodded at him again. They are coming for you. If you remain here, you will be killed. His limbs felt heavy, as if they were weighed down by some impossible force. Please. It begged. I do not wish for you to die. Wake up. A small distant part of him stirred. Some semblance of self emerged from the void. No. He didn't want to die. Dying was bad, right? He wanted to live. But his body was slow. Sluggish. When he tried to breathe, he found himself gagging. Retching for air. Distantly, he heard voices. He's waking up. Well, of course he was. More sedatives. Damn it. Keep him under. A fresh wave of nauseating dizziness hit the whiskered warrior, driving him back under. He would have succumbed were it not for gentle presence in the back of his mind buoying him. Something reached deep inside him and lifted him back up even as his mind threatened to spiral back down again. They were trying to keep him asleep. Why? An ember of anger ignited in his chest as he fought back. Fury lent him strength and he thrashed his way out of the cotton-swaddled haze they were trying to trap him in. They're not working. A note of panic now. We've given him enough to drop a Goliath. The beginnings of a snarl built in the back of his throat. Panic warped into sickly fear. What do we do? In desperation, Naruto flung out a call to an old friend. Kurama. A little help. Silence reigned supreme and the blonde balked. No. No, no, no. No. He couldn't be gone. He just couldn't. Some remnant of his was still there, but of his old friend he heard felt. Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. Not a thing. His absence left a profound heart-cracking sadness in its place. Kurama couldn't be dead. He was invincible. Eternal. Immortal. And yet the truth stared him in the face. His fingers began to twitch. Just kill him already. Someone snarled. We're not getting paid enough for this kinda heat. Rage ignited deep within his chest, lending his eyes an otherworldly glow. It burned through him in a rush of heat, pushing the last of the drugs from his veins. A clawed hand broke its restraints and flailed wildly. It found purchase. Flesh. Someone screamed against the palm of his hand. Maybe he should have felt guilty about that. He didn't. Hand became fist as he squeezed. Something crumpled in his grasp, spattering his whiskered visage in strange wetness. He didn't know what it was. Didn't care. Because he still couldn't see. Someone screamed nearby. Close. Too close. There's a tube in your mouth. The voice informed him as his lungs began to spasm. Remove it or you will suffocate. I will guide you. Reach up to your right and pull. Now. Naruto did as he'd been bade and found purchase once more. Then he yanked. Hard. It was pain and then there was pain. Red-hot agony seared through the Jinchuriki's chest to burn his world black. He coughed harshly against it, expelling blood as he tore himself free and tumbled off the table. By the sage. The pain. His healing factor was quick to throw itself into overdrive, but it did nothing to numb the pain searing through his throat. He coughed again, expelling a lungful of a viscera. Those damn voices were shouting at him now, he could scarcely hear them for the ringing in his ears. Something slammed into his back. It felt like a knife. It grated off something sharp. His head snapped up. A whimper echoed behind him. What is he? On your left. Yet again he trusted in the voice and spun, sweeping his legs. Someone yelped. A body crashed to the floor. He followed the sound and pounced on it, colliding with something. The knife skittered off his back again, and he hastily summoned a Rasengan to his palm and smashed it forward. His attacker screamed. Something spattered his face again, and hands grasping at his back fell slack. He stepped back and a wet thud echoed somewhere him. Naruto ignored it and stumbled upright, flailing blindly. Die, you damn human. Someone snarled. Die. 3 quick impacts slammed into Naruto's back, nearly causing his legs to buckle. A gasp tore from him, stealing his breath away. He wanted to curl up into a ball. I have you. Instead he grit his teeth as burning sensation came on again. He couldn't see them, but he could feel it in his mind's eye, wounds closing, flesh rippling as his back knitted itself back together. He heard a whimper, words little more than garbled gibberish. An oddly pungent aroma filled the air and he wrinkled his nose at the scent. Someone had soiled themselves. It wasn't him. Really? He croaked the word, alarmed at just how hoarse his voice sounded. Did you just piss yourself? Your eyes are still recovering. The voice informed him, close enough to touch. They should be back in 3, 2, 1. All at once, the world swam back into focus. Blurry at first, then with increasing clarity, reality welcomed him back into the fold. He soon wished it'd end. With his sight restored, Naruto was blind no longer. Small wonder he hadn't been able to see earlier. He'd overloaded his eyes. He found himself stood in the center of an operating theater, all wide and blindingly bright. The harsh light from the ceiling didn't help. Neither did the blood he stood in. Red. So much red. It was everywhere. It spattered the walls, the ceiling and even himself, bits of bone and broken bits stuck in his hair. His stomach lurched, gorge rising before he managed to master it. This was his doing, he realized. He did this. He had killed them. Strangely enough, he couldn't bring himself to feel any guilt about it. They, whomever they were, had tried to kill him. There had been 3 of them. By the work of his hands, now there was but one, a lone man in mismatched armor regarding him, covered in the blood of his companions. He wore a white mask over his eyes, concealing his identity. Were those ears? Atop his head. As the blonde looked on he crawled toward the door with a mangled leg, trying to escape. White Fang. His erstwhile ally informed him. They broke into the lab. I believe they were searching for you. Him? What for? Why me? He muttered. I do not know why. Well. There was one way to find out, wasn't there? He started forward, a grimace tearing across his face. His attacker saw it and turned bone white. The man's mouth worked wordlessly for a few moments before he found his voice, even then it was little more than a terrified keening cry. A monster. The man gibbered, trying to raise his weapon. Naruto batted it out of his hands and snapped it over his knee. The ruined halves sailed over his shoulder to join the mess behind him, producing an awful racket. The revived shinobi ignored it, reached down, and grabbed a fistful of the man's ruined jacket. In a single seamless motion he hauled him to his feet, leaving him dangling in the air. Gloved fingers scrabbled uselessly at his fist. Who sent you here? He demanded. The grunt spat in his face. I'll never tell you. Wrong answer. Naruto moved beat to fist with silent intent, producing an audible pop. Alright. His victim wailed. I'll talk. It was a man with a mustache. He told us to come here. Gave us the codes and everything. Why? For a moment, the man clammed up, fear overriding common sense. The sight of bloody clawed fingers left him babbling like a terrified child all over again. Naruto felt it all. Every negative emotion, his fear, his dread, his hatred for all things human. Terror overpowered it all, and the words came crashing down. He sent us for you. Limp legs kicked out uselessly against his chest. We were supposed to kill you. Something hardened deep inside him. Wrong answer. Naruto slammed him against the wall. Once. Twice. 2 blows rendered the White Fang member what the hell that was a silent, stunned mess. A third put him under for good. The body went slack in his grasp, beaten into unconsciousness. Naruto dropped him and left him with his fellows. He'd live. There were more pressing concerns. Have to move. Have to get out of here. Too claustrophobic too. He made it all of 5 steps before the pain hit him again. His knees buckled and he slammed a fist into the floor to catch himself. It wasn't enough. Now that the adrenaline had worn off, every injury came crashing back in a red tide. After so long being still, even the concept of standing threatened to sap his very soul. His throat closed and burning tears seared at his eyes, a wordless hiss fleeing from his lips. This was a deeper kind of pain. Something was wrong. Something was broken deep in his very being. He couldn't think. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't even move. Would you like me to numb it? Yes. Every breath was weak. Please. Just make it stop. A strange numbness settled over him, easing his agony. Not stopping, allowing him to straighten his back and push. In the silence that followed he took a deep, shuddering breath to steady himself. But with silence came confusion, and with confusion, yet more questions. Where was he? How had wound up here? Why were people trying to kill him? Nothing made a lick of sense. Look, he licked dry, cracked lips. Whoever you are, thanks for the assist. I would have died without your help back there. Your gratitude is noted. Now that he listened, the voice sounded rather like a young girl. I am glad I could assist. Where are you? He squinted against the harsh light. I can't see you. No. Came the denial. I am here. Naruto looked left. Naruto looked right. Naruto found nothing but empty air. I don't see anyone. You using a radio or something? I am not. Another denial. He gulped. Then where the hell are you? I am a part of you, currently in your spinal column. His heart skipped a beat. Now, I am sending nanites into your bloodstream to repair your injuries and alleviate the stress on your chakra coils. The pang of fearful anger stabbed Naruto's hope in the heart. Panic flared. He stamped it down. No. Stop. Don't freak out. Fear was the enemy. This voice had helped him. That made it an ally, right? And apparently it was a part of him, too. Great. Nothing wrong with that. It didn't bother her. Nope. Not at all. Not a bit. It bothered him a lot. He'd reach his share of books. He knew how this ended. Terror gibbered again, and this time he found a good grip on it and throttled it into oblivion. Calm. Deep breaths. In. Out. In. Wood. You're inside me. He had to speak slowly, lest he burst into hysteric laughter. Correct. Their reply was flat. Does this distress you? A little, yeah. Do you have a name? I am STEL. He groaned. What does that mean? It stands for sentient, task-minded, empathetic lifeform, at your service. Somewhere, somewhen, somehow, Naruto's broken mind plucked humor from the jaws of despair. You're missing an E in there, somewhere. Even then, he couldn't help but state the obvious. You realize that, right? You're correct. Had his guessed parasite possessed eyes, he suspected she would have rolled them. I do not understand the acronym myself. Names seldom make sense in Atlas, I've found. Originally I was to be called Steelheart, but father disliked that name. Thus, STEL was given to me as my moniker. Atlas? The hell was an Atlas? I'll just call you Steel, then. That pleased him. Thank you. I prefer that name. Still doesn't tell me who you are or what you're doing here. My creator was Pietro Polendina. A pause followed when he didn't respond to the name. I was designed by him to ensure and maintain your vital functions until such a time as you awoke. Your spine was broken. I did my best to repair it. Rest assured, father was most thorough in my design. Nothing was left to chance. Have I succeeded in aiding you? Naruto bit down another surge of panic, looked away from the blood on his hands, and willed himself to breathe. Well, he was alive. Big honking gaps in his memory and a lot of pain, but alive nonetheless. Surely that counted for something. Even if Kurama was gone. No. He couldn't be. Maybe the big bastard was just sleeping. He could still sense negative emotions. That had to mean something. It must mean something. To think otherwise threatened to send his already fragile psyche careening off a cliff. Yeah. He muttered. Guess you did. Did that voice just squeal? Capital. I'm so glad I could assist you. A niggling worm of fear burrowed into his chest. You're not controlling me, right? Can you? I cannot. Steel denied all his doubts with a happy chirrup. Safeguards have been put in place. Even were I able to do so, I would not. Father would be cross with me. He felt a ghostly tap against his nose, more a phantom sensation than anything. I was placed in your body to prevent your heart from shutting down, but I am here to learn as well. Well. That sounded decidedly less ominous than he thought. I wish to know what it means to be human. She confessed. I asked for this. I'm a bit of a bad example there. Naruto wrinkled his nose. Wait, so this Pietro guy is really your da? The doors slammed open, cutting him off. 5 individuals emerged and he whirled to meet them with a snarl. Sharp eyes took stock of them at once. 2 girls. 3 men, all of varying size and appearance. Military uniforms all, and didn't that just set him ill at ease? They looked as startled to see him as he did them. Or maybe that was just the blood and bits of brain in his hair arc. Gag reflex. Don't think about it. Holy shit. One of the men whispered. He made mincemeat out of them. Like looking at a damn blender. Another whispered. Naruto drew back. Are they enemies? Those are the Aesops and I do not know. His erstwhile ally confessed, a rare note of hesitation threading into her voice. This attack may have been limited to these 3 men, or its treachery may run deeper. They reacted quickly. That is all I can say. Just a moment. I'll hack into the database to ascertain their purpose here. Wait, what's a hack? I do not have time to explain. You were unconscious for months after being thawed. I grew bored. I'll be but a moment. And then she was gone. It was a strangely disconcerting feeling, being left alone in the world again. Naruto wasn't sure he liked it. One of the soldiers stepped forward, hands splayed to show himself unarmed. He took in brown hair, sharp green eyes, and was that a fishing rod on his back. Odd choice for a weapon, that. The man wore an easy smile, one tempered by anxiety. This man was afraid of him. Even if he did well to mask it, he sensed it all the same. Easy there, friend. Those jade eyes pierced him. No need to be so tense. Not your enemies. Just calm down. Friend. Paranoia reared its ugly head in Naruto's heart and he reared back. Friends don't hook friends to an operating table. Where the hell am I? That's classified. The short woman stepped up beside the first. Come with us, asset. Naruto stepped back. The man rounded on her with a hiss. Harriet. What does it matter, Clover? She shrugged. He's a nobody. Any sense of relief Naruto might have felt evaporated in that moment. Resolve hardened in his heart. Asset. Even he knew the meaning of that word. Orochimaru used to call his test subjects that, and while this Clover fellow didn't seem the sort, it drew all sorts of unfavorable comparisons. He should know. He'd seen some of those poor bastards. Bile burned in the back of his throat and his eyes flashed. Well, this nobody is leaving. He declared, pushing past them. Get out of my way. Someone Harriet. Grabbed at his elbow, stopping him short. And where do you think you're going? Anger unspooled in Naruto's chest and he nearly struck her on the spot. Where was he going? He wanted to go home. He wanted a nice steaming bowl of ramen. He wanted to sink into his bed and pretend this was all just a bad dream, some mad work of fiction penned by a madman. But it wasn't and he couldn't, and so he reeled himself back in. Slowly, purposefully, he drew his arm out of Harriet's grasp. She wasn't able to stop him, even as he turned to face her. Clover could have taken advantage of his exposed flank in that instant, could have struck at his back while he was distracted. He didn't. Thank the sage for small mercies. I am going to walk out that door. He stabbed a finger toward the blood-spattered frame and the 3 operatives guarding it. Through you, if I have to. It did not get the reaction he wanted. Her eyes narrowed on his. Oh. Think you're man enough, Whiskers. His forehead slammed against hers. More than you, that's for sure. Harriet, for once in your life, shut up. Clover hissed. The largest of them ready to hammer. Look, kid. We don't want to fight. Move, Naruto warned again, a dark undercurrent cutting into his voice, now. Or I'll make you move. Weak though his body might be, his chakra reserves were still full to bursting. The ice had done nothing to take that from him. Maybe these uptight bastards wouldn't be so smug once they drowned in an ocean of shadow clones. Come hell or high water, he'd walk out of here. One way or another. Thus resolved, he took a stance and raised his hands, all but slamming his fingers together. The curious heat burned at the corners of his vision. He couldn't quite figure out what it was, save that it seemed to alarm those before him. What's wrong with his eyes? The hammer-wielding woman asked. It's almost like he's a Mai. The red filter snapped down over Naruto's vision, startling him before he could hear her complete that sentence. Threat assessment complete. Steel chirped in the back of his head. I have returned. They were placed on standby here. Would you like to view my report? Yes. He hazarded. Something in the back of Naruto's battered brain twitched and he felt a wave of information crash down over him. He nearly drowned in it. His eyes twitched, struggling to process it all. Unbidden he felt his gaze lock onto one of the soldiers, the furthest one from the left. Arrow mean. Steel informed him briskly as his gaze settled upon the seemingly harmless soldier. Faunus. Weapon, fetch. A versatile boomerang. He uses an immobilizing semblance. Cannot focus on multiple targets. Recommend immediate close combat before. Naruto edged forward. It was the stone that set off an avalanche. Stay. With a yelp, the Faunus panicked and thrust a finger at him, that lone word cracking like thunder. His world froze. No. Not the world, Naruto realized. Him. He was the one frozen. Every muscle locked up at once, leaving him rigid where he stood. It was like being trapped in the ice all over again, but worse. He was a human statue, one aware of everyone and everything, every second of immobility. Primal panic bleated in his chest, blotting out all sense. Before that. Steel finished with a sigh. Would you like to employ countermeasures? Naruto grit his teeth as the other four started towards him. One of them pulled out restraints. Yes. There will be pain. Just do it. Agony spiked in Naruto's skull and quite suddenly, he found himself free. The Faunus recoiled in surprise. An eerie heat began to burn in his eyes, he gave himself to it, flung his right hand out and pushed. There couldn't be any other word for it, the act was pure instinct. The wave of invisible force scattered them like leaves, ripped marrow from his feet and slammed him into a wall with bone-crushing force. Something crackled over his body in a series of sparks as he fell forward. He did not rise again. Ore levels holding at 5%. The muted sound of clapping filled his head. Target incapacitated. Well done. Marrow. Naruto reeled his hand back in, eyes wide. Wait, was that? You rat bastard. Harriet howled and dove at him in a bolt of light. I'll have your head. Harriet Bree. STEL swooped in with more information. Weapon of choice, fast knuckles. Speed semblance. May I suggest an intercept course? Cheeky bitch, calling him an asset. This time he felt a touch of confidence. Hit me. The confused pause followed. I cannot do that. I meant yes, damn it. Oh. Another pause. Please plant your feet, extend your arm, and lean to your right. 3 degrees, please. His body reacted accordingly. An oddly pale arm caught the operative by the throat, clotheslining her. That was all he had to do. Harriet's speed did the rest for him. A gurgle of surprise greeted him as she slammed into his outstretched limb, then her own momentum lifted her up into the air, flipped her over his elbow and slammed her down into the floor. A second series of sparks flew through the air. Her eyes rolled back in her head as she slumped. She did not rise again, either. Ore levels at 2%. Operative Harriet has been knocked out. You'll pay for that. The muscles woman surged forward, swinging her arm in a devastating arc at his head. Elmadern. Sure enough, STEL was quick to supply him as he dodged backward. Weapon of choice, timber. Semblance, or roots. I recommend. Oomph. Naruto missed the rest as timber came down on his head with incredible force. Stars burst before his vision, snapping his head down, but only for a moment. He surged back up a heartbeat later, seizing her weapon in a clawed palm, before she could pull it away. Clawed fingers bit down, buckling the metal. Around them the ground fractured, forcing the other operatives back. Oh. For a moment, he thought he heard a note of surprise in STEL's voice just now. Never mind. He flung Elm's weapon up into the air and the woman with it as she foolishly held on. From there he raised an arm and caught her by the left boot. She cried out in surprise, but he didn't give her time for anything more than that. In a single seamless movement he spun and slammed her into the floor. Left. Right. Left again. A flick of his thereafter sent her screaming into the very same wall beside Marrow. She toppled out of it and lay across him, sprawled out in a stunned heap. Like a proud announcer, his togglong proudly declared her defeat. Operative Bree has been immobilized. Aura at 10%. The last two, perhaps realizing the mistakes of their fellows, closed in on him together. Einziki. Stel's voice came quickly now as he backpedaled, fending them off with quick blows. Weapon of choice, thorn. He seldom uses it. Semblance, aura vines. A brief pause followed and then, clover ebi. Weapon of choice, deadliest catch. Semblance, good fortune. I advise close combat for both or you'll just it. He grabbed them both by the face the moment they got close enough and smashed their heads against one another. Once. Twice. Aura crackled and they crumpled bonelessly at his feet. Just like that, it was done. Chest heaving, eyes wide, Naruto stood among the fallen. Aye, that was how did we do that? He rasped, flicking a bead of sweat from his brow. We picked them apart like they were nothing. How? I'm tired, Steel slurred the words. Too much processing sleep. Without warning, her presence retreated from the forefront of Naruto's mind, leaving him alone with his thoughts once more. Frightful prospect, that. When he turned toward the door at last, he glimpsed his reflection in a glistening metal wall, one of the few left untouched in their conflict. What he saw there alarmed him. His face was not as he remembered, gaunt and pale from captivity, whiskered cheeks slightly faded. But despite that, he'd lost little of his muscle mass. Not a cause for concern, that. No, it was his eyes that frightened him. What in the blue hell is this? Violent violet flames fanned out from the edges of his gaze, lending him an almost demonic appearance. Actual. Flames. His eyes were on fire. Yet when he touched them he felt no heat. When he peered closer, his worst fears were confirmed. His eyes weren't simply burning, rather, they changed altogether. Gone were the sky blue orbs he was so fond of, in their place were eyes he knew all too well. He'd seen them countless times, both in the face of ally and enemy alike. Rinnegan. Well, shit. He whispered, touching one hand to his face. How did I get these? Stel had no answers for him. Naruto blinked once. Twice. Thrice. And yet those rippling orbs did not change. When he looked down he found strange silver lines threading through his flesh. They too, were strangely warm to the touch. For all his earlier weakness he felt strong. Powerful. Even his skin was strangely warm, almost as if something were heating it from within. The hydraulic door opened again and he rounded on it with an exasperated hiss. Not again. Hello. Glassy green eyes regarded him, set within a cherubic freckled face framed by long flame-colored hair. How are you feeling? Violet eyes flicked over her. Clad in olive green styled dress with a black hem and a white blouse, this girl looked utterly harmless. The rest of her outfit was much of the same, soft and gentle colors meant to please the eye. She even had a bow somewhere in there. He found himself relaxing just looking at her. Better yet, her smile didn't feel forced, in fact, now that he noticed it, he couldn't sense much of anything about her at all. Unfortunately for him, said smile faded when she saw the bodies. Did you do this? She asked. Naruto raised his hands to ward off her attack. They attacked me. Even to his ears the defense sounded weak. I wanted to leave. Imagine his surprise when she accepted it. Yes, we were informed of a break-in. Her head, but why are the Aesops laying on the floor? They're napping. He offered. Oh. She blinked and he felt giddily at once. Well, I do hope they wake up soon. That's no place to sleep. Was she really that naive? It was almost adorable. And worrying. Where am I? He asked at last. Who are you? You are in the kingdom of Atlas. The girl was all too happy to answer. Oh. And I am Penny. She clasped both hands behind her back and sketched a quick bow before straightening. Pleased to meet you. This is a secret laboratory sanctioned by General Ironwood. You were being kept here to recover while we studied you. You were studying me, the last word escaped him in a weak croak of sound. Why? To learn from you, of course. She chirruped, blissfully blind to his mounting anger. No harm was done to your body, despite the insistence of Mr. Schnee. Her nose wrinkled adorably. I do not like him. He wanted us to dissect you. The general refused. Thanks. Naruto wasn't sure he should be grateful at all. He could barely remember anything. Why did she remind him of the little sister he'd never had? No. Stop. Resist. Don't be distracted by the cute. I do hope you're comfortable. She continued, once again ignorant of his stress. His frown deepened. Why wouldn't I be? Your heart briefly stopped beating for some time just last month. Penny tilted her head a fraction to the right and motion sent her hair swing like a fiery curtain behind her back. I was under the impression humans needed that organ to live. When he proved too shocked to continue, she pulled on with that chipper smile of hers. Oh, but don't worry. We fixed yours. Here at last, her brow furrowed. Some additional implants were necessary, however. She is correct. Steele's voice returned at last. I was a part of said implants at the time. Naruto flailed his arms. Did you make me a robot? Negative. You are very much a creature of flesh. However, some of your organs failed while comatose. As my sister said, some cybernetic implants were required. Sister? He said the word aloud without thinking. Penny perked up. Are you talking to STEL by any chance? Can she communicate with you? Hello? By the log, this was weird. Yeah. He tapped his head. She's pretty chatty. He certainly felt different. Stronger. Was that it, then? Had he simply been enhanced? He wasn't sure how to feel about that. His body was well his. Now he had a passenger and a number of strange modifications he didn't much understand. Thankfully he still possessed all his limbs, even if he did feel unseasonably warm. Not an unpleasant heat, just warm. As if someone had lit a furnace deep inside his chest, leaving the heat to spread to the rest of his body, suffusing it with tingling heat. Like it or not, he was different now. Greater shocks were yet to come. The implants tend to run a bit hot at times due to stress. Penny informed him, perhaps sensing his distress. We're still working on that. He said humans may experience some discomfort. Wait. He paused, recalling her words. Aren't you human? Right. Penny hiccupped and looked away from him. I'm human. Definitely a normal human girl. Certainly not a robot. Nothing to see here. On a whim, Naruto dug a fingernail down into his palm. Yup. Still bled red. That was something of a relief. Penny, a new voice called behind the door, what's all the racket? Once more the door parted. Once more, Naruto tensed. He needn't have worried. Rather than a second hit squad or another group of unruly soldiers, he found himself face to face with someone altogether less threatening. No dangerous killer was this, but an elderly man with dark skin and short balding white hair. He wears a green cap with oval-shaped glasses and red vest over a cream shirt with a pink bow tie. His dark mustard pants and leather boots match with his cap and red-brown belt. He didn't even walk, but rather sat astride a strange walking chair of some sort. It shuffled into the room now, its four movable legs slowly plodding forward to meet him. A silver brow rose. But rather than sound the alarm, its owner merely sighed. My. You certainly don't do anything by half measures now, do you? Just like that, the newcomer took one look at him and didn't deem him a threat. He didn't care for the ruined corpses or the captives scattered to the four corners of the room, nor did he express any outrage at the sight of the unconscious bodies of the Aesop sprawled about therein. If he felt threatened by the shirtless young man standing in the midst of them all, he did little to show it. Well, this is quite the pickle. He glanced down at Harriet and the rest. I imagine they're going to be quite angry with you when they wake up. Naruto released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His blazing eyes dimmed. Hello, father. Penny chirruped happily. You look well. How's my girl treating you? Well, father. A rueful smile plucked at the corner of Naruto's mouth. Despite his earlier assertion, this was all too surreal for him. His mind, well, it didn't quite break, but it didn't want to accept the reality before him. This had to be a dream. It just had to be. The alternative that someone had frozen him for thousands of years, that Kurama was dead, that he'd been left with a new voice in his head, why, it was too much to bear. Perhaps that was a delusion on his part, some way for his mind to shield itself from all the horror he'd been through. He didn't know. Didn't care. She's mouthy. He said instead. I do hope you don't mind her intrusion. Pietro apologized profusely. I had planned to give her a body once you were awake, but I was so busy repairing Penny at the time, then there was the matter with the blockade. He wrung his hands together fretfully. Rest assured, what you're experiencing now was never meant to be a permanent solution. It doesn't have to be. She'll be out of your hair the moment you ask. Naruto coughed. Shouldn't you be panicking? Oh, I am on the inside. Pietro dabbed a piece of pale cloth against his clammy forehead. Rest assured, I'm absolutely terrified. You've made quite the mess. You could probably snap me in half and no one would be able to stop you. Possibly Penny, but who's to say? And still, his gentle gaze conveyed none of the fear he surely felt. But you won't attack us, will you? You're no murderer. Naruto looked away shamefaced and missed the NDT that followed. If you were, Clover and his squad wouldn't be waking up and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Naturally. STEL drove the final nail into his coffin. Of course. As expected of the person I picked. I hope to learn well from your example in the future. Now then, allow me to be the first to greet you properly. Pietro Polendino offered him a weathered hand. Welcome to the world, son. Then he stepped in with a wide smile to clasp the other. Bright green eyes met his. I hope we can be the best of friends. With a long-suffering sigh, Naruto squeezed her fingers. Alright. Not making any promises. This was a right mess he'd gotten himself into, wasn't it? He must have cracked his head to have a dream like this. Terrorists, soldiers, robot girls, it sounded like something out of a madman's mind. Not something he had ever thought his poor psyche would ever conjure up. Once again, that delusion shielded him, blinding him to reality. The truth hurt. The light of knowledge proved too painful for him to endure. So he buried it instead in willful ignorance. Buried it deep and prayed that it would stay there. Yup. Definitely a dream. And if this was a dream, well, he could do whatever he wanted. So maybe, just maybe, he could enjoy it while it lasted. Just for now. It wasn't as if the fate of the world was at stake or anything. What could possibly go wrong? General Ironwood was a man on the edge. From what little Naruto had been told of him, it sounded like one good shove would send him tumbling over that edge. A man like that probably had a lot on his plate. Politics, bureaucracy. Yeah, Naruto wasn't looking forward to this meeting. Clad in a dark blue tunic with matching slacks and a dark gunmetal gray jacket, he was warm if nothing else, as he followed Penny down the hall. He could be thankful for the change of clothes at least. It was a far cry from the hospital gown he'd woken up in. Likewise, his new boots were of solid wintry make and fit him like a glove. Now if only his outfit had more color. Maybe some orange or red. You have an elevated heart rate. Steel informed him helpfully. Are you alright? Naruto smiled despite himself. It's called stress, Steel. What is stress? Stress is complicated. The man out of time muttered. I guess it's something you feel when you're excited. I see. A pause. Are you excited, Naruto? Terrified, really. He admitted. Why? A hysteric giggle threatened to burst out of him. Why? He'd woken up with cybernetic implants and insane reflexes beyond what he'd had in his last life. In a time where masked maniacs robot girls were a thing, a realm in which he had the Rinnegan which he didn't remember getting. And a voice in his head. Not to mention the very real possibility that Kurama was dead. Also, his body still felt like it was currently on fire because of said implants. He was pretty sure his eyes were still doing that weird flame thing, too. But hey, this was a dream, right? None of that mattered. He kept telling himself it. Yup. Definitely a dream. Couldn't be anything else. Go with the flow. This is not a dream, Naruto. He bit his lip until he tasted blood. Let me have this, Steel. A note of confused sorrow threaded its way into her voice. Do you wish for me to be silent? I know, he pinched the brow of his nose, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. You helped me. You're not at fault here. Had she a brow, he imagined it would have furrowed. Even though you claim that this is a dream? Yeah. He stabbed both hands into his pockets. Ain't your fault. Steel made a tiny noise of delight. It felt like a laugh. Then I hope this is a pleasant dream for you. Why you gotta say it like that? For all his bitter thoughts, Naruto felt smile grow another inch. In many ways, he was beginning to understand his new guest, even if he wasn't fond of her intrusion into his life. She was not Kurama. She never would be. Where the old fox possessed a cutting wit, Steel was almost childlike in her curiosity. She was learning. Naive in some ways, and yet so knowledgeable in others. Blast her and her questions. Always with the questions. Her innocence shouldn't have dulled his fears. But it did. It meant she wasn't some crazed program that would snatch control of his body out from under him. He didn't even think she would if she could. What a strange dream. He must have eaten some expired ramen or something. Here we are. Just ahead of them, Penny pushed the doors open with a cherubic smile. General Ironwood, sir. I've brought him. Sat behind a slate-gray desk, a man in a crisp white uniform awaited them. Wearing a matching flowing coat and blue trousers alongside a blue collar and red tie, he looked every bit the General Penny said he was. His hair was black goingry, while his forehead bore a strange of silver metal just above his right eyebrow. Naruto had dreaded this meeting. But now that he saw him. This was a man. Not a monster. The poor bastard looked positively haggard. That, and in need of a good shave. Like he'd had one too many bad days and a single good one since. Piercing blue eyes met them, not unlike his own, but sharper. Harder. Naruto knew it at a glance, here was a man who held the weight of the world on his shoulders. Penny had spoken highly of him during their short-lived journey to his office, and thus far. The man met his expectations and then some. Ironwood was a general, one who not only wielded great power, but great responsibility with it. Welcome. He saw them and called out in a cordial tone. Please, come in. Penny entered first, leaving Naruto to follow in her footsteps as they entered the office proper. The space within was grand in size of Spartan, a domed enclosure spread out to expose the Atlas skyline at his back. The waxing light of the morning sun filtered through, forcing the wayward warrior to squint against it. Taking mercy on him, the general waved a hand and the light from the windows dimmed. Remarkably, the next words out of his mouth were an apology. I'm sorry about the Aesops. The man clasped both hands together, wringing one glove against the other. They're good soldiers to be sure, but they can be a tad overzealous at times. You have my personal reassurance that they will be reprimanded for their actions against you. His mouth settled into a frown. I'll have them cleaning out latrines for a week after the mess they made. Naruto blinked, caught flat-footed by the admission of guilt. Thanks. I appreciate it. What? He did. Clover might have been reluctant to fight him, but it didn't change the fact that Aesops attacked him first. They should have just let him through. Instead, they panicked. In his enervated state, it was a miracle he'd managed to beat them back. That steel had helped him trounce them. That was just happy coincidence. We fought well. His companion preened. There's no shame in that, is there? Nope. Alright, maybe he was corrupting her. Just a little. Still didn't regret it, though. As he looked on, Ironwood stood holy hell. He was tall. From his desk and strode briskly around it to meet him. Naruto followed him with his eyes, only now noticing his shadow. Behind the general, a woman clasped both arms behind her back and stood at attention. Her hair was as white as her uniform, her eyes chips of frozen tundra set within a pale face. She didn't look much pleased to see him. Naruto found he wasn't much pleased with her either. Even now he could still sense negative emotions strongly as ever, and this woman was just one big ball of trauma. Anger. Fear. Regret. So much regret towards what? Naruto didn't know. But he knew she was afraid of him. Of that much he was certain. Any other time, he might have been curious as to why. Now, he just wanted away from her. Being in the presence of such powerful sentiment left him feeling ill. At ease, Winter. The general reassured her when she moved to intercept. We're all friends here. This Winter looked like she'd sucked on a lemon, but obeyed her superior. Yes, sir. Please forgive her. Perhaps it's best if we start over from the beginning. He stopped halfway and offered his right hand to him. Welcome to Atlas, son. I am General Ironwood, protector of this fair city. But you can call me James. His worn face creased in a tired smile. If there's anything you need, anything at all, you have but to ask. Naruto blinded rapidly. Well. That wasn't what he expected at all. The general is an exceedingly blunt man. Steel chimed in his ear, filling in the gaps. More often than not, he favors the direct approach. Furthermore, he has expended significant state and personal resources to ensure your survival. It stands to reason that he would wish to remain on good terms with you. Blue eyes flitted to Penny. She smiled guilelessly and flicked him a thumbs up. Just like that, Naruto released a breath he hadn't even realized he'd been holding in the first place. Winter aside, they were treating him like a person. A human being. Not an asset or whatever the hell Harriet had called him. Azure orbs flicked back to Ironwood's hand. Only 3 seconds had elapsed. Well within the norm for politeness. Wait. How did he know that? Penny prodded his back. Apology accepted. Shaking it off, he stepped forward and clasped his palm. He noticed something amiss almost immediately as they shook. Wait. James' hand was cold and rigid, even through the glove. No, not cold, rigid and stern like a block of ice. No, not ice. Not ice at all. Your hand, it's metal. Ironwood granted him a grim grin as he pulled his palm away. I thought you might notice that. Half of my body is cybernetic. Sure enough, James pulled his glove off and rolled up a sleeve, revealing the metal limb beneath. When he did the same to his leg, Naruto grimaced and looked away. Those injuries were ghastly. He knew pain more than most, but just the sight of Ironwood's wounds drew a flinch from him. It took a strong or stubborn man to endure that kind of agony. For that, he gained some semblance of respect. Losing a limb was painful enough, but too. He shuddered at the thought. Sounds like there's a story there. There is. Something in the general's face thawed. Just a fraction. Call it the legacy of a misspent youth. That said, how are your implants treating you? All implants are functioning at 100% capacity. Steel chirruped proudly. Nanites are dormant, ready to react to trauma. Will that be all? Naruto grimaced and flexed the fingers of his left hand, frowning at the silvery lines etched into his palm. They're a little warm. Understandable. James commiserated with a nod of his own. Yours were extensive, or so I've been told. Naruto felt his stomach roil. Just a dream. Just a dream. He clutched to the only defenses he knew and blotted the panic out. It was a paltry defense and he knew it, but it was all he had. If he allowed himself to even consider the possibility that this was real, he'd break. He just knew it. So he stamped the thought down and buried it in brick-filled ignorance. Dreams had a purpose, right? So what was his? What was he doing here? Thankfully, you're still quite human. He clutched onto those words for dear life. He had to. And I see you've met Steel. When he winced, Ironwood saw it. She's quite the chatterbox, isn't she? What is a chatterbox? Penny giggled behind them. Naruto didn't have the heart to tell Steel the truth. She's useful. He settled for the middle ground instead. It's just unusual have a voice in my head. Ironwood regarded him with a keen eye. You aren't angry. Naruto wasn't sure how to take that. He was alive. He could feel his heart beating and red blood ran through his veins. Moreover, he could still feel every part of himself. If they'd replaced half his body with cybernetics, surely he would know. Chakra still burned in his coils. There were no wires. No cords. His brain wasn't in a glass jar somewhere. Even if this was a dream, he was alive. Had to be. Machines didn't have chakra. If they did, they wouldn't be having this conversation. Wouldn't want the dream to become a nightmare now, would he? I'm a little confused. And hungry, now that I think of it. Still, curiosity reared its head and for the first time since he'd awakened Naruto allowed it. I do have some questions, though. By all means, ask. James gestured to a seat. I'll do my best to answer. Would you mind if I ask some of my own? I'll have some food brought up while we talk. Winter. Sure enough, the temperature plummeted several degrees as white-haired woman glared at Naruto. Undaunted, the blonde returned her glower until her resolve broke and she stormed off. A pale hand gripped the door they'd just come through and pushed it open, then slammed it just as harshly. He listened until the brisk click of her heels vanished down the hall. I apologize for her. Ironwood said as he reclaimed the seat behind his desk. Winter doesn't trust easily. You're an anomaly to her. I'll try to ignore her. He shrugged, sliding into the chair opposite it. Now, my first question. And surprise. General Ironwood proved himself a man of his word. Unfortunately, he had questions of his own. So many questions. Looking back, Naruto wished he'd never asked them. Ignorance was bliss. Naruto's head spun. So many questions. Too many answers. When they'd begun, the sun had been well on its way to rising. Now it was afternoon. Winter had brought them refreshments and a brisk meal, then another when he'd made crumbs of the first. And the second. Followed by a third. Needless to say, she wasn't much pleased at being a waitress. Maybe that was why she was still glaring a hole in his back. She certainly looked fit to kill him for it. Why? Wasn't his fault he was hungry. He'd been asleep for centuries, if not longer. He needed fuel in the tank. If that meant upsetting a prissy little princess like her, then so be it. The cold never bothered him anyway. Does food taste good? Yeah. He groaned, taking the last bite of an apple. Suo good. Sorry. A grimace turned his meal sour. You can't taste this, can you? Her voice went small and shy. Maybe someday. Curiously, he noted Penny hadn't eaten a thing. Unsurprising. Naturally. Steel swooped in. My sister does not require sustenance. Somewhat sated, but still ill at ease, the wayward warrior leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he'd been told. This is fascinating. By contrast, Ironwood looked elated in as much as a military man could. You're telling me you can sense negative emotions? Among other things. Came his response. Did he need to spell it out for him? Bloody dream. It's really nothing special. James shot upright. Can you detect lies, then? Naruto shrugged. Dunno. Never tried. Lies are a form of insincerity, which is also a negative emotion. The general rationalized. If what you say is true, then you should be able to detect it alongside hostile intent. Ahem. He coughed, hiding his excitement. In theory, at least. Are you unwilling to try? Naruto felt his right eye begin to twitch. He wasn't going to let this go, was he? Fine. He settled back into his seat. Tell me a lie. Anything will do. Very well. My birthday was yesterday. Something twitched in the back of his head. The vaguest sliver of false intent meant to mislead. Negativity. Nope. False. James clapped his hands together. Correct. Perhaps something more vague, then. Steel perked up in his mind. If I may assist. Naruto shrugged. Sure. I am capable of amplifying your senses when prompted. Additionally, I can read elevated heart rates and micro-expressions in those nearby you and ferret out indications of stress or falsehoods. She paused, and her words came on even more quickly, blending even further in the throes of her childlike excitement. Coupled with your ability to sense negative emotions, I estimate a 90% chance at detecting a lie. Will this assist you? Hot damn. In all honesty, Naruto was tempted to keep that knowledge to himself. There was no telling what the general would do if he thought him a living lie detector. He trusted James, but a power like that had the ability to corrupt even the most well-intentioned man. And lying wasn't in his nature. Dream or not. He relayed what Steel had told him regardless. Pietro, you brilliant bastard. Ironwood made a strange sign that Naruto didn't recognize. Penny tried her hand a moment later. Winter likes the color pink. A pall of silence fell over everyone present. Naruto frowned. Huh. Not a lie. Winter bridled. Sir, you cannot possibly believe this nonsense. White, frosty. Naruto pointedly ignored the angry squawk that followed. What you told me earlier, this Salem person, she's real. He quashed the instinctive surge of dread that followed. She's trying to destroy the world. You're not pulling my leg on this. Huntsman, aura, grim, semblances, and this four-kingdom nonsense. That was a bitter pill to swallow by itself. But a literal queen of all evil trying to conquer and or destroy the world. Not so much. Already his mind began to draw a dangerous comparison to Kaguya, and the less he thought of her the better. Hell, if Salem commanded the Grim, that meant she had an army, just as Kaguya had the White Zetsu. Well. At least she wasn't immortal as far as he knew. It couldn't be that bad, surely. Some dream this was. If he didn't know better, he'd say he was living a nightmare. It's the truth. James granted him a grave nod. May I be frank with you? He had spoken truly. Still reeling, Naruto half-heartedly waved him on. Sure. Not like this can get any worse. I'd like to ask for your help, no. The general amended with a cough, shaking his head. We need your help. He glanced between Winter and Penny. Atlas and Mantle both. A war is coming. And quite frankly, we aren't prepared. He sensed something harden in the man's soul just then. We need your power. Will you lend us your strength? The words hit him like a physical blow. So that's what you're after. Naruto sank back into his seat. Already he felt the beginnings of a migraine coming on. There was such a thing as too much knowledge, of too many questions. And he'd asked them all. James hadn't held anything back, he would have sensed it otherwise. Even now he was being wholly honest with him. Nothing was kept in reserve. What would be expected of me? You would be working closely with Penny. Ironwood began. A cough interrupted him and he sighed. Winter would be your mind until you settled in. Penny tugged at his arm and he turned to find her green eyes regarding him earnestly. Will you assist us? That was the question now, wasn't it? Dream or not? In his heart of hearts, Naruto was still a relatively good person. Minor memory loss and modifications aside, his soul hadn't changed. He was still himself. These people were asking for help. No tricks, no traps, just a simple earnest plea for aid. They weren't trying to guilt him into it, though they could have. They had kept him alive for Sage knew how long. James could have leveraged that against him. He didn't. That alone earned him some semblance of trust. How could he say no to that? Rather, he didn't want to. He'd already made his decision the moment Ironwood opened his mouth. I'll do it. Steel sang in his head. Yay. James blinked, taken aback. You will? Penny hopped in place and clapped her hands. Wonderful. Winter grit her teeth and made a noise like an avalanche. Naruto bit down an instinctive flash of anger toward the older woman, even as his fists balled at his sides. Stuck-up woman. Not his concern. Suppress it. Conceal. Don't feel. Whatever beef she had with him, he wouldn't let it poison their negotiations yet. But she was pushing it. Oh, was she pushing it? Did I stutter? He forced his thoughts outward instead. I said I'll help you. What do you need? I know you're already using my blood, and that's kinda weird. Ironwood released a ragged breath. In all honesty, I thought you'd refuse. You would be well within your rights to. Why? Naruto balked at him. I help people. It's kinda my thing. Besides, I don't go back on my word. Ironwood stared at him for a long moment, giving nothing away. A rusty chuckle escaped him. With that laugh, Naruto felt the last of the man's stress evaporate like morning dew. The general stood a little straighter. His eyes burned a bit brighter. He seemed lighter on his feet, younger, the weight of duty and the pain of defeat slipping away from him. You're right. Rather than remark on it, he raised a hand to his face and pinched his forehead. Loyalty always matters. Naruto wrinkled his nose. I'm sorry. No, it's nothing. James gave him a careworn smile. Just an old saying of mine. Still, I can see you're a man of integrity. I like that. A hand came down on his right shoulder. The human one. Initially, I had considered inducting you into the military, but frankly that would be a waste of your talents. We need boots on the ground. Lots of them. You're the first step to that of course, but there's so much to be done. Was he actually asking? Naruto blinked. Frowned. Tilted his head. Smiled. No, he probably wasn't. Was he? How many boots we talking about? Ironwood blinked. Winter scowled. Penny perked up. More than one man can provide. James despaired. I'm afraid we have a long, hard road ahead of us. Naruto felt the beginnings of a smile plucked at his whiskered cheeks. General, I think we're gonna get along just fine. Can I show you something? Certainly. Ironwood waved him on. If you think it will help. Help? Yeah, for what he had in mind this would do more than help. He crossed his fingers before his chest and pulled on his chakra reserves. Pulled hard. They answered him readily, strong as ever. Flames pulsed at the corners of his eyes, but he ignored them and focused on the task at hand. Penny granted him a curious look and Ironwood with her, but Winter looked strangely startled by the gesture. She'd be more than startled in a minute. Calibrating. Steel informed helpfully. Releasing nanites. Enhancing chakra. Would you like to proceed? Wait, she could do that. That smirk became a shit-eating grin stretching across his face. Yes. Chakra howled into the air with a raging pulse of azure light. A plume of white smoke chased after it, all but bursting from his body to swell through the room. Somewhere in the haze, Winter yelped. To her credit, Penny reacted quickly. Even as the thick smog filled Ironwood's office, so too did she react. In a single bound she sprang past him, vaulted Ironwood's desk, and opened one of the windows. Naruto led her. That was the funny thing about being underestimated. He never grew tired of all those gobsmacked faces when he knocked an arrogant prick's opinions into the mud. The smoke spilled out. And they saw. Is this enough for you, James? Multiple voices spoke in unison. Or did you need more? An even 36 shadow clones stared back at them, grinning from ear to ear. More than he'd intended to make, but surely that was a good thing. The more the merrier. Sensational. Are they illusions or Penny stepped to one and poked the copy in its side. Ah. She gasped when her finger met resistance. They're real. Nonsense. Winter balked and pulled at the cheek of another. They can't possibly be ow. Her questing digit withdrew when the clone bit her. Naruto laughed at the sight. Oh, they're real. Go ahead. Poke one of them again. Only then did he deign to look back at Ironwood. The general hadn't even coughed when he used that jutsu. Nope. He'd not said a word. Didn't have to. As Naruto looked on, the great protector of Atlas crashed back against his desk and slammed a hand down against the lacquered wood for support. His already pale face had gone absolutely pallid. His human hand rose to wipe a bead of sweat from his brow. How, he croaked the word, mastered himself, and swallowed his awe. How many of those can you make at once? More smoke. Winter yelped and crashed backward onto her rear. Hundreds. Thousands. Naruto shrugged and his new copies mirrored the motion flawlessly. Dunno. Never really pushed my limits before. They can take a good hit and anything they learn, I learn. A thought occurred to him. Pretty sure the reverse applies too. I tested that. James set his jaw in a determined line, but even then he couldn't quite keep a smile from his face. This will change everything. There's so many. Penny glomped the nearest clone to her chest. May I keep one? The blonde brow rose. I'm standing right here, Penny. She released the poor thing. Oh. Right. Sorry. Naruto chuckled, if only because he had an inkling of what Ironwood was on about. Not only were shadow clones replaceable soldiers, but he could create entire swarms of them. They could learn what he learned, exist in multiple places at once, hold a line to cover retreating soldiers. And those were just the ideas he thought up. No doubt James had far grander aspirations. That was all well and good. So long as it helped. He dispelled his brothers with a thought, leaving naught but smoke behind. I didn't realize you could make that many. Steel chimed. What, did you doubt me? I'm not that rusty. I did not mean to offend. No. Naruto lowered his voice. No, you're not bothering me. This is just a weird dream. I'm sorry, I must have misheard you. Ironwood arched an eyebrow. You believe you are dreaming? Naruto shrugged. Well, yeah. Why wouldn't I be? This is insane. No way it's real. Gotta be a dream. Can't be anything else. Friend Naruto has been most insistent on that matter. Penny chirruped helpfully. I believe he is relying on such an assertion to forestall an imminent mental breakdown. Got it in one. One could have heard a pin drop in the silence that followed. Delusional fool. Winter looked away from with a scowl. Sir, with your permission, I can have this buffoon brought to the psych ward to be re-evaluated. I'm slowed to a crawl as her words trailed off into an animal bleat. The fresh spark of anger snarled through Naruto's thoughts, turning the world red. Ordinarily, he would have suppressed it. Pushed it down and smiled as he always did. This time. Something stopped him. If this was a dream, what was the harm in speaking his mind? None like anyone was going to call him on the carpet for it. And besides. Winter's presence had rubbed him raw from the moment they'd met. He hadn't even spoken to her and she'd been glowering at him. Now. He saw the disgust in her eyes. There it was. That look. He hated that damn look. Two could play that game. Hey. Steel. He whispered. Her response proved immediate. Yes. I am here. Earlier that thing you pulled with the Aesops, can you do it again? Her tone turned contemplative. Do you wish to engage in combat with Specialist Schnee? What? No. He blanched at the thought. Just I want to shut her up once and for all. Got any dirt on her? Are we playing a game? Sure. A small smile plucked at the corner of his mouth. You can call it that. One moment. Processing. Hacking into Specialist Schnee's scroll. Here you are. Her records. The wall of text slammed down before his eyes, only to vanish a moment later. Knowledge he'd never known before burned in his mind, as if she'd downloaded it directly into his brain. Well. Good thing this was a dream. If it wasn't, he might honestly be a little worried about that. Huh. Neat. Well, alright then. Game time. Perhaps this was a little vindictive of him. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Who could say? After all, this was just a figment of his imagination. It wasn't as if this would have any consequences. Quiet, broody. He snapped. By the log, you reek. Penny's hands flew to her face, eyes wide. Said Shni startled. Excuse me. Ironwood watched intently. Are you deaf? With a snarl Naruto pinched his nose with one hand and waved the other before his face. All that negative emotion. Ugh. I can't stand it anymore. Enough. His arms flew up into the air when her stricken expression didn't waver in the least. What's your deal? I didn't do anything to you, and you've had it out for me from the moment we met. Why you impudent little. But that's not enough, is it? When she reached for her saber he stormed forward, slamming a hand down around the back of her palm to prevent her from drawing. The other shot up and dug into her collarbone, just above her breasts. You just have to be the center of attention, the apple of everyone's eye. Can't have anyone upstaging you now, can we? The second someone outpaces you, you pitch a bitch fit and act like a child. By now, Winter's face had turned a rather fascinating shade of red. Her mouth worked wordlessly, but no words emerged. Naruto sensed weakness and pounced. Why so serious? His forehead slammed against hers. Not going to throw Daddy Dearest's money at me to shut me up? That always worked for you before. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Wah, wah, wah. He parroted, voice taking on a pitch to match hers. Look at me, everyone. Pay attention to me, everyone. I'm a Shni. I'm the best. You got daddy issues or something. Most rich girls do. You freaking look like one. I know your type. He reared back and his fingers snapped up, flicking her forehead. Any second now you're gonna snap and try to. Winter wrenched her saber aside and slammed it at his face. Steel yelped. I recommend immediate evasion. No need. There was never any danger. Ironwood roared. Winter. Stop. Her strike swerved wide, ramming into the wall beside him. A thin red rent opened in Naruto's cheek. It healed instantaneously. More proof that this was a dream. If this was real, she would have taken his head clean off for baiting her like that. The false knowledge emboldened him, causing him to tilt his head just so. What are you doing, specialist? James surged forward. You nearly. It's fine, James. Naruto raised a hand, forestalling any reprimand he might have given. She won't hurt me. After all. She's it is. Coward. He spat the word with a venom that burned deep in his soul. I'm right, aren't I? The moment someone proves you wrong, you lash out. Is that why you ran off and left your siblings behind? Actually, I take it back. Rinnegan eyes narrowed to rimmed slits. I take it back. You're not a coward. You're a hypocrite. Some big sister you are. You dare. Oh, I dare. He snapped back. If I had a little brother and sister I would die before leaving them behind. In hindsight, he really had no way of knowing what he'd done. How could he? His words hit the nail right on the head and hammered it down. To him, this was a dream. Just a figment of his imagination. No consequences to be had, or so he thought. But for Winter, this was reality. Every syllable slashed at her defenses, pricking her pride in the worst of ways. She'd been angry before, but now. She was beyond that. Well past that. He saw the precise moment that supernova of rage became a frigid lake of frozen fury. Steel saw it too. I believe you have made a blunder. Winter grabbed him by the collar and slammed her forehead to his. You. Me. Down in the yard. Now. And now you want to wail on me. Sure. Prove my point. Naruto grin was just the right shade of vicious. It's your funeral. Oh. Penny hopped in place and clapped her hands, blind to the byplay taking place before her. I hear funerals are all the rage. May I watch, General? James pinched the brow of his nose. This works out well enough, I suppose. He heaved a sigh. We needed a way to introduce you to the men anyway. When neither looked at him, a small bemused smile plucked at the corner of his mouth. Like a father watching two children bickering over a favorite toy. Alright, Winter. You'll have your wish. You may regret it. I doubt that, sir. She released him and straightened with a scoff. Strange semblance aside, he's just a boy. The Aesops let their guard down. I will not. Naruto blinked. The hell was a semblance? Never mind that. She'd called him a boy. He was 18, for crying out loud. Just for that. His lips pursed in a thin line of displeasure. I'm gonna kick your ass twice as hard. Their duel would take place in the courtyard of Atlas Academy at dawn. Little more than a sanctioned spar to the uninitiated, it nevertheless drew a crowd as all duels do. Naruto found he could see them easily from the window of Ironwood's office, a veritable sea of bodies pressed in on every side, student and huntsman alike, all crammed in like sardines in a can. Apparently scuttlebutt was a thing, even in the military. He wasn't sure why the sight surprised him, only that it did. Early morning sunlight flickered across their gray and white uniforms like a flame, casting the yard an amber glow. He hadn't expected to wake up too well this. Is all this for me? In a sense. Ironwood's hand came down on his shoulder, earning a brief glance for the man in charge. It's not every day Winter challenges someone to a duel. Together the two of them gazed down at the growing crowd below. Coupled with your recent altercation with the Aesops, you've made waves in the ranks. The people want to see you. As they should. Affirmative. Steel chirruped in his ear. I believe celebrity is the proper term. He gathered that much. Just a dream. Naruto grit his teeth until he felt a molar crack. It doesn't matter. I'll wake up soon, right? It's barely been a day, though. He muttered. Did you really leak information about me? James promptly shook his head in the negative. Not my doing. That was me. Both men turned to look over their shoulder as the elevator dinged once. Guileless green eyes blinked back them as Penny emerged, pushing a cart before her. Naruto frowned at the case it contained, but his gaze was drawn to her dazzling smile instead. She was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Did Atlas have one of those? Better double check. Salutations. She snapped off a chipper salute, halting only a few paces away. I told as many people as I could. James chortled softly. Not unexpected. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm. Naruto clapped a hand to his face. Penny, no. Truth be told, he didn't much see the point in fighting Winter. Oh, there was a fierce burning dislike between the two of them, but it all seemed pointless, somehow. They were on the same side, weren't they? He still wanted to knock her upside the head, but tempered by sleep, the desire wasn't quite as strong as before. Least he'd gotten a proper outfit out of this mess. He'd since shed his borrowed uniform in favor of an outfit that both had some damn color and actually let him breathe. Now clad in a cobalt blue jacket throw over a crimson tunic and a pair of pitch black slacks, he felt more himself than he had last night. A good 8 hours of sleep really did wonders for the body, it seemed. Snug and warm with his matching gloves and boots, he was at least ready to face the bitter cold of Atlas, if nothing else. And hey. Color. Much better than the drab gray-white uniforms the students were forced to wear. I agree. Steel chirruped. Blue and black are my favorite colors. Addendum. They are also the colors of bruises. Which specialist Shni shall soon be. Well, what was oddly aggressive of her? Almost worryingly so. Hey. You, all right there? He asked tentatively. Specialist Shni insulted you. I dislike her. Naruto opened his mouth to agree, only to find Penny fiddling with the crate she'd brought in. Now that he looked at it, he noticed it was long, slender-looking thing. Larger than him, even. He squinted at it. A weapon of some kind. No, it was far too big, even for James to carry. Which begged the question then. What was in the box? I'm afraid I'll have to ask you not to hold back against Winter down there. Ironwood interjected abruptly, drawing his attention away from the container. She'll hate you for it. What, more than she already did? He didn't say it aloud. A blonde brow quirked. Even if she loses. Even then. The general granted him a soft chuckle. She's not a bad person, just. Gotta stick up her butt. Naruto finished for him. Penny giggled behind them, and Ironwood coughed into a gloved fist. I wouldn't go that far. Why? Naruto felt his brow turn stormy. Valiant superior that he was, James still tried to come to his subordinate's defense. She's under a lot of pressure. And that gives her the right to take her anger out on me? No. James knew when a battle was lost and withdrew his opinion. As I said before, she doesn't trust easily. I believe the bout should clear the air between the two of you. A roll of the eyes followed. She's still gonna lose. Now it was Ironwood's turn to smile. That certain, are you? Naruto could think of at least 100 different reasons why Winter Shni would eat her today. It was a long list. He chose not to speak them. Just so we're clear, I'm going to humiliate her out there. Arrogant to say aloud, but it was the truth and James deserved to know what he'd signed up for. I don't know how to hold back. He glanced down at himself, still frowning at the faint silvery lines threading his chest, visible even through his shirt. Not like this. Hope you. One hand touched his gleaming Rinnegan eyes, recalling the myriad techniques he had seen Nagato use so long ago. Techniques he didn't yet know how to use. I can hold off using some of my more punishing jutsu, but that's the best I'll be able to do. That's all I ask. Steel swooped in, good girl that she was. I estimate our chances of victory at 99.9%. If she had a body, he would have given her a big hug. Speaking of which. Penny wheeled the card over at last, its contents now visible for all to see. We found these with you. The general asked me to bring them up for you to inspect. Bring why the hell is this thing? Naruto found himself balking at a wickedly sharp tooth, easily larger than he was tall. At least he assumed it was a tooth, given the shape. Yellowed with age perhaps, but sharp all the same. He rapped its knuckles against it on a whim, only to wince as a wicked jolt of pain shot up his hand. Solid as a rock too, despite the wear and tear. But why show him this? This was the smallest of the bones we excavated near you. Ironwood waved a gloved hand at the jagged tooth. I'd hoped you could shed some light on what they were. Do you know? Nah, steel. Naruto shook his head. Not a clue. The blonde touched a hand to the bone, and so too did a frown touch his lips. Even now he could still sense chakra. For a moment, he feared what he might find. That was well, it was a very large tooth, and he could think of several large creatures to whom it might belong. Impossible as it might seem, it would explain his partner's absence. His fears were for naught. There was chakra there, but it was dark. Twisted. Like an ugly, gnarled root. Little more than a remnant of its former self. This isn't him. He muttered, quietly awed and relieved. As he ran his fingers over the bulky bone. It doesn't belong to Kurama. This isn't his chakra. Besides, he didn't have a body. This I don't know what it is. He released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Whatever they were rich in chakra. Overflowing with it. Yet another odd little mystery for him to ponder. And you found these with me? Yes. But who is Kurama? The faintest ember of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe you'll meet him someday unless I wake up. The long-suffering sigh echoed behind him. As you say. James had tried to challenge him on the this is a dream notion, once. Never again. Perhaps he realized it was best to keep him in good spirits. Maybe he understood that a mental breakdown would be imminent if pushed. Perhaps he just pitied him. Wood could say. Regardless, he didn't push. Good man, Ironwood. He knew better than to poke and prod a broken man. But he didn't give up Ghost, either. Dream or no, you don't want to make a fool of yourself down there, do you? Naruto felt his face twist in a grimace. Blasted. James had a point. He was a general after all, and backing down now would just leave a foul taste in his mouth. Moreover, he knew Winter would never let him live it down for the rest of his days. Dream or not, she was a prickly one. If he gave up, she'd call him a coward. He'd call her something worse. One thing would lead to another, weapons would be drawn, blood would be shed, and finally someone would die. Nope. All the nope. Not in his dream. Alright. He croaked, turning toward the elevator. I'll do it. But I'm going to take her down quickly. Hope you don't mind. Excellent. James steered him towards in, Penny falling in beside him. We'll see to acquiring you more comfortable accommodations after the duel. Penny moved past him and clasped Naruto's hands in hers. I wish you luck in your fight, boyfriend. Ironwood missed a step and walked into a wall. Behind him, Naruto tripped. Boy. Are you not a boy and my friend? She blinked innocently. I shortened the word. His face went a nuclear shade of red. Naruto groaned. Penny, no. James chuckled. Ha. As ever it was a rusty sound, but within moments it grew louder. Bolder. Stronger beneath his beard, Naruto saw his lips twitch into a smile. Ironwood wasn't able to hide it. Not this time. Thank you. I think I needed that. The general sighed, wiping a mirthful tear from the corner of one eye. I can't seem to remember the last time I laughed that hard. Shall I give him a kiss on the cheek if he wins? Penny posited. Father suggested it would be a suitable reward. Naruto's once measured retreat became a full rout. Winter considered herself a sensible woman. Orderly, if not rational. She knew what she liked. The military. Training. Ironwood. Not necessarily in that order. Conversely, she knew what she disliked. Father. The Schnee name. Herself. Winter, specialist of Atlas, was not Winter Schnee. They were two separate beings, and she would see that they remained as such. All her life she had been able to separate the two into simple, distinct categories. Her professional life did not cross realms into her personal one, nor did she, despite what others said, allow her emotions to affect her rational judgment. Then along came Naruto Uzumaki, throwing her neat, order life into disarray. General Ironwood was obsessed with him, rather, the potential he presented. And worse, the boy knew it. He'd taken full advantage. Hey. A ways behind her, a man slapped a wad of lean down on a hastily erected table. I'm putting 100 on the kid. Ooh. Someone rallied to his cry. I'll take that bet. Winter fought down a snarl and flicked her saber out, tracing a thin line of ice against the ground. Traitors. The lot of them. Everyone wanted to see the new boy, to meet the young man who had knocked one of their strongest squads about like a bunch of children. Would that Clover and his team were here to see this? Ironwood hadn't allowed it. He'd left them stewing in a cell overnight for their transgressions. They wouldn't be released until later this evening. Winter didn't believe that they'd been bested so easily. Even with the footage flung in her face, she'd not been able to accept it. Surely there had been a trick of some sort. This brat, this friend, this cheeky churl. Honestly, he was worse than Crow. At least Branwen had known better than to broach her personal life. Moreover, how did Naruto even know it? He'd been frozen in ice and strapped to a table thereafter. She'd never spoken so much as a word to him until yesterday. He'd said such horrible things to her, dragging her passed out in front of everyone. The truth cut deep. She regretted leaving Weiss and Whitley behind all those years ago. She regretted leaving them with father and mother. She regretted so many things. It was that implant of his. Had to be. Her scroll had been hacked, she'd seen the notification after she returned to her quarters. Wretched little parasite. Too clever for her own good, that one. She'd cautioned the general against reactivating that project. He hadn't listened. No one listened to her. Not since they'd found him. AI were dangerous. Penny was different of course, trusted even, but she'd proven her worth. This one was unknown. Untested. Couldn't they see the danger presented by that kind of artificial intelligence? No. Of course not. Her protests had ignored. And therein lay her problem. Winter didn't like being ignored. Perhaps she was projecting her anger. She didn't care. To have such hypocrisy flung back in her face, it was too much. And father wanted her to seduce him. No. Never. She'd not have it. There he was now, entering the ring. Winter glowered furiously at him, refusing to give him the satisfaction he sought from her. He raised an arm in greeting. She turned away with a huff. Yes, he might be good for Atlas. Yes, she might have misjudged him. Yes, he might even be a good person underneath his scars and cutting wit. But he would never have her hand. He would never have her respect. Nor her loyalty. She would beat him so badly that he'd never look at her ever again. He would know his place. So she swore. Winter looked fit to stab him 7 ways to Sunday. Naruto felt her gaze upon him like a physical force, threatening to freeze him where he stood. Her gaze followed him as he climbed into the ring. Intent. Probing. Searching for any sign of weakness or an opening to exploit, perhaps. She'd not find any. Good thing this was a dream. If it weren't, he might actually feel bad about what he'd said to her. Now was as good a time to test the limits of this dream body. He'd stared down immortals and gods that would have left Winter quaking in her boots. Why would he be afraid of some silly schnee? She appears to be cross with you. He sighed. Noticed that. Glancing about, he could see why Ironwood chose in the courtyard for their duel, rather than one of the many rings in the academy. Out here there was more than enough room for him and Winter to range about as they pleased. Someone had gone to great lengths to erect bleachers, and a number of vendors had been allowed onto the grounds. He even spied what might have been a betting table near the back bleacher, and those were packed to the brim. Huh. Seemed even Atlas could loosen up once in a while. Maybe this kingdom wasn't so stuffy after all. Ironwood stepped up on nearby podium and spoke briskly. I'm sure you all know why we're here, so I'll keep this brief. His piercing gaze flicked between them both. You will fight until one of you yields, is forced out of the ring, or your aura is exiled. Naruto's hand shot up, cutting the general short. Question. Muted laughter greeted him, but he ignored it. This was a dream, after all. He wasn't about to go knocking heads together for something like this. Yes. Ironwood called back. If this is about aura, I don't think. You have it. Steel whispered quickly. Naruto blinked. What's this now? I didn't catch that. Aura. For a moment, he thought he felt ghostly fingertips brush his chin. You have mine. And what's mine is yours. I will not let her harm you. Wait, don't you need a soul too? Oh. Realization dawned anew. Oh. If Penny had a soul and by definition aura, then it stood to reason that her little sister would have the same, albeit in a lesser quantity than her sibling. Even if she lacked a physical form, she had a consciousness. She thought. She reasoned. She felt. Did that not constitute the essence of a spirit? Even if she was little more than a chip in the back of his neck at the moment, she existed. Pietro had made her as he'd made Penny. And at the end of the day, a soul was a soul. He wasn't one to judge. Winter has enough. He pivoted quickly before he could make a right fool of himself in public. Isn't this a little unfair to her? A few whistles and an angry squawk by the schnee rippled through the crowd. I'm sure she'll be fine. Ironwood favored him with a smile. Whatever you say, Pops. Winter seethed. If I may suggest a course of action. The whiskered warrior turned his attention inward. Thoughts? I would suggest making her angry. Specialist Schnee has a temper. She doesn't fight well when irritated. Alright. Anything to wrap this up quickly. Angry. I can do that. Should be easy. Placing on hand to the side of his face, he called out to her, raising his voice to be heard by all. What's wrong, Ice Queen? Not gonna have your butler fight for you? Ain't that a thing you posh rich types do? The crowd gasped. Winter sucked in a sharp breath through her teeth. Cease your drivel. Nah. Naruto adopted a grin and threw himself into the facade wholeheartedly. Do you even know how to swing that sword of yours? Want me to give you a lesson or two? A lie, of course, he barely knew how to use a blade at all, but she didn't know that. His words needled her all the same. Tell you what. He smacked his lips, I'll do it free of charge. A muscle jumped in her jaw. If you won't hold your tongue, her voice became a hiss. Then I will gladly remove it for you. Well, that's just kinky. His grin grew. But you know, that line seems kinda familiar. Might be quoting someone here, Bude. Violet eyes flashed as he took stance. Take it. It was the right thing to rile her up because Winter hung her head, shoulders going clack. When she raised her gaze, her eyes were much like her namesake. Did the temperature just drop a few degrees? His breath rose in a faint cloud of steam before his face. Before, she'd been angry. Now, she looked downright murderous. You. She bit out the word. You're even worse than him. Naruto blinked. Who? QROW. With a yowl she closed the distance and got right in his face. Her first strike slipped into his guard, trying to carve a bloody trench across his face. Naruto tilted his head to the right and evaded it, then swayed left as she cut out at his unguarded side. Right again. When it became clear she wouldn't be able to lop his head from his shoulders, she aimed for the center of his chest instead. Aura sparked and her blade skittered off a raised knee. Another. And another. Another still as he blocked each strike exclusively with his legs and nothing else. Stop mocking me. Mocking? He frowned genuinely. I ain't. Just don't feel like using my arms. They're still sore. Arg. She spun and tried to hamstring him, forcing him to hop over it. Easy to see, easier to read. He alighted atop her saber and planted himself there with a pulse of chakra against his heels. Winter's face went white as her hair. As if she were staring in a mirror. For a moment Naruto stood there, perched upon the razor's edge. A blonde eyebrow arched down at her. His boot slammed into her face. Winter recoiled with a grunt and slammed down to one knee, taking her blade with her and forcing him to backflip away. He came down upon a nearby railing and waited for her to rise again. It would have been so easy to end things there. His every instinct screamed at him to do so. He couldn't, if only because he knew it wouldn't be a satisfying end. She stood, wiping a thin line of blood from her nose. She didn't whine. Didn't cry. All he received was a nod. Winter could fight. Honestly, the realization surprised him. Jab at her face. Catch her saber on the back of his arm. Retaliate with a headbutt. A wild grin flashed across his face as she staggered back. Could be a trap. Wait. Don't pursue. She snarled and sure enough, a glyph sprang into place where he would have been standing. Naruto waited for it to fade. Afraid? She jeered. Nope. He smacked his lips. Just giving you a chance to catch your breath, princess. Her blade stabbed down, creating a glyph beneath her. A storm of frozen birds burst from it, catching him unawares. Alright, neat trick. But unless you intend to peck me to death. Icy jaws closed around his shoulder. Naruto reared back and shattered them with a single punch. Summoned she could do that for a moment, just a moment, it had felt like he was facing a shinobi. Surprisingly, it angered him. Another wolf came on with only a snarl, and he shattered that as well. This felt like a bastardization of the summoning jutsu. She created mindless constructs to do her bidding. This was wrong. He didn't like it. Her dagger swept at his eyes and he swayed back. When she made to do the same with her saber, he grabbed it and yanked her in. His fist planted itself in her stomach. Breath burst from her lungs and she folded around his arm like wet tissue paper. His free arm soared in, ramming an elbow down on the back of her neck. She fell and he reared back to stomp down between her shoulder blades, pushing her face into the cold stone. Yield. Never. She growled, slashing upright. The second glyph howled to life beneath her boots and she was on him again. Parry. Parry, parry, parry. He gave ground quickly, allowing her to set the pace for once. Winter didn't rely on team attacks like the Aesops. She didn't seek to swarm her opponents through raw numbers, but sheer skill. Finally he spied an opening and kicked out with his heel, driving a boot into her solar plexus. Her boots bit into the pavement as she slid back. Surprise flashed through her eyes. Followed by caution. She didn't rush back in to face him. She was wise in that, if nothing else. He'd fought the Aesops in a blind panic, with no thought but escape. There could be no running here. Would you like to enter combat mode? Steel asked suddenly, startling him. If so, please say mask. That is the password. Why not? Now was as good a time as any for a field test. Naruto snarled. Mask. STEL answered immediately, her voice darkening. Copy. Nanomachine surged up and over his body, through his blood and out of his veins. Naruto felt rather than saw what happened next. It felt odd, all things considered. Like 1,000 ants crawling under and over his skin at the same time. Not particularly painful, but not pleasant either. Something swarmed up and over his face, rendering his world a single slit of vision. The green visor slid over his eyes. At least, he assumed it was a visor. Hard to tell. Everything felt oddly light. As if he'd drank a little too much and gotten himself buzzed. Winter balked. What did you do?" When he didn't answer, she reacted, bursting forward from another glyph. This time, Naruto caught her blade in his bare hand. Sparks skittered. Her weapon stopped cold. Well. Much to his surprise, his voice was darker, muffled by the pseudo-helm steel had encased his head in. How the turns have tabled. Placing one hand beside his back, he shoved Winter away and beckoned to her once more. "Come here, Ice Queen. I'll make a slushie out of you." Now that he thought on it, there was something he'd always wanted to try. And if this was a dream, well, free of consequences. On a whim, his hand cracked out as Winter flew past, striking her hand on the flank. Her charge turned into a stumbling walk and she rounded on him with a squeak, face flaming. Rogue and reprobate. She sprang back, warding her saber to prevent another attack. "You dare." "I'll dare a lot more than that. Less chatter, more splatter." And he moved. He'd been fast before, but with Steel's aura and nanomachines coursing through his veins, he felt lighter than ever before. Winter had barely been able to press him before. Now, it was all she could do to strike him. Yet more proof this was a dream. None of her attacks hurt. Her blade skittered harmlessly off his skin. Steel laughed in the back of his head, inordinately pleased with herself. It was such a rare sound that he found himself mirroring it, actively chuckling, much to Winter's dismay. Each strike forced her back. First one step. Then 2. 3. She neared the edge of the ring. "Shall we end this?" "Fine, bye him." "Yeah. Let's." In a moment of desperation, Winter launched her dagger at him, cutting a line of ice into the air. Rather than dodge, Naruto swapped himself with a shadow clone at the last instant, overcharged it with chakra, and turned the poor doppelganger into a smoke bomb. From there it was a simple matter to muffle his footsteps and get behind her in the smoke. He heard her sputter and snarl curses into the fog as she searched for him. All the while, she remained blissfully unaware of the foe at her flank. Armored legs bent, hands forming a familiar seal as he took aim with vengeful intent. For a moment, he felt Steel's innocent curiosity. "What are you doing?" Naruto didn't answer, speaking aloud would have given himself away. Memories. He knew this technique well. Kakashi had inflicted it upon him a lifetime ago, back when he'd been but a boy. Just thinking of it drew winds from him. Hurt like a bitch back then. It was certainly going to hurt now. Forsaking modesty, he struck hard and true with a shit-eating grin. 1,000 years of death. The girlish shriek split the air, and Winter's aura abruptly flatlined with an ominous crack. Momentum caught up with the surly Shni a moment later. She did not simply leave the ring. Oh, no. To say so would have been a lie. Winter did not walk out of the ring. Nor did she run. She certainly didn't crawl. Nay. She rocketed out of the haze and past the boundary, clutching her rear like an embarrassed schoolgirl as she hollered her lungs out. Her butt struck the ground once and bounced, skidded, then bounced again. Out. Ironwood's arm slammed down on the podium, all but sealing her defeat. Leaving her firmly out of the ring. The noise reactivated Winter. What? At her cry, the crowd, curiously quiet in the wake of Winter's short-lived flight, erupted into noise. Naruto sketched a graceless bow for them. He couldn't tell if they were with him or against him. Meh. A small part of him wondered if they had seen his little trick. The rest didn't care. He was too busy laughing. He'd already committed this moment to memory. He would forever remember the mortified expression Winter Shni wore. Those wide eyes, blue eyes wide, her jaw hanging open, face red as a rose. His gaze met hers. She knew exactly what he'd done. And by the log, he was never going to let her live this down. Naruto laughed even harder. Priceless. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.